Welcome back to Carolyn's History. We're going to continue our series on how to write a DBQ. So today we're going to explore the contextualization statement. Okay, let me move my head here. All right. Okay, so what is a contextualization statement? So this is something that needs to be, let's go back, in your essay. All right, so it's 2 to 3 sentences that describe broad trends or historical events happening before or during the time of the essay prompt. And this statement should go just before the thesis statement. So your contextualization, right, 2 to 3 sentences of that, and then 1 or 2 or 3 sentences comprising your thesis statement, that will all be your first paragraph or your intro paragraph. All right. Okay, so these are broad trends, right? Not super specific. Okay, so how I teach this to my students is I put the topic of the prompt here in the middle, and then so it's trade from 1200 to 1450, and I draw this kind of bigger circle on the board, and then I have students fill in the big trends. All right, so something students will generally come up with is, oh, well, trade, so Silk Road, Indian Ocean Road, Trans-Saharan trade routes. Well, that's really specific. That is not exactly what we're thinking of with broad historical trends, right? It's things that are kind of happening throughout the whole world globally. And it's, just before the time of the prompt or during the time of the prompt. So if we brainstorm a little bit more, what's really happening? We're thinking of Unit 1 and Unit 2. Well, the rise of empires, right? We get the Song dynasty in China, and then the Mongols conquer them and usher in the Yuan dynasty. We've got our Seljuk Turks conquering in the Middle East. The Mali kingdom is rising in Africa. And so, yeah, that's one big trend, right? This rise of empires. Okay, so what else did we come up with? Ooh, remember the Black Plague, right? So this is your time to kind of brainstorm this whole unit or this whole time period. And so we know the Black Plague was big, right? And then if we're thinking really big trends, right, we've talked a lot in class about technology, right? Technology is spreading. Oh, it is spreading on these trade routes, right? But we've got cannons and paper and gun, or maybe not cannons yet, but gunpowder, right? Rockets, porcelain, jade, and the block printing, right? There's a lot of things going on these trade routes, and a lot of it is technology. And you probably also remember religion was traded or was spread along these trade routes, right? Buddhism, Islam, and others. And also if we think back to the Black Plague, well, it was spread on the trade routes too. So it's these kind of bigger ideas that we're thinking about. So if someone were to ask you, what's the big deal about 1200 to 1450? What are the kind of couple things that you're like, oh yeah, for sure, this is what happened. So an example from another time frame would be 1450 to 1750. Man, what huge thing happened? They discovered the Americas, right? Okay, so some time periods are a little bit easier to remember the big events, but this is why you've got to, kind of review, and you do need to have a general sense of dates. Okay, so what should be included in a contextualization statement? So you want to list your 2 to 3 broad events or processes, and then you also need to explain them or summarize them, right? So this is not, empires rose and like trade happened and, religion and the Black Plague happened. I'm done. That is not going to cut it. So you need to explain each of those. And this kind of depends on your writing. Sometimes we need a transition sentence to tie the contextualization to your thesis. So if it's really kind of broad and out there, you might need a transition sentence. Okay, so how do we get started, right? How do we start writing this? So there's a couple sentence stems you can use. So during a time when blah, 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 right? List your events, or during 1200 to 1450, A, B, and C happen. And then you would go on to summarize A, B, and C. So this may seem really simplistic, but I know my students struggle with just like, how do I start writing? Like, what's the first word? What's the first three words? And so if you start with this, it'll give you a good start of, just doing contextualization correctly. And then your writing is going to get more sophisticated as you go. So it depends where you're at. You may be able to just, right away and write a nice contextualization statement, and others might need to do during this time frame, blank, blank, and blank happens. So good things to remember about grading an AP DBQ. We don't look at style. You don't have to use big vocabulary. It doesn't have to sound pretty. You've got to do the things they tell you to do. Like you've got to write a contextualization statement, and it needs to be accurate. You need a thesis statement, those kind of things, but it doesn't have to be really pretty or flow, right? So if your transitions are choppy or not even there, you're going to be okay. All right, so what does a contextualization statement look like? Okay, so I wrote this one, so it might be a little more sophisticated than what a student would write or not, and I stuck to my sentence stems. So during 1200 to 1450, empires rose and fell, the Black Plague ravaged Afro-Eurasia, and technology and religion were spread along trade routes. Empires such as the Song dynasty rose in China, but fell to the Mongols and resulted in the Yuan dynasty. The Seljuk Turks conquered much of the Middle East, while the Kingdom of Mali rose in Africa. 1200 to 1450 was a time of vast trade. Not only were goods traded on the Silk, Indian Ocean, and Trans-Saharan roads, but also technology, religion, and other ideas. Okay, well, let's dissect this and make sure I did it correctly. Okay, so I highlighted where I listed, right? We said we need to list 2 or 3 big events. So did I do that in yellow? During 1200 to 1450, empires rose and fell. All right, so that's 1. The Black Plague ravaged Afro-Eurasia. That's 2. Technology and religion were spread along trade routes. That's 3. Okay, so those 3 things, I need to summarize and explain them, right? If you don't do that part, you don't have a contextualization statement. Just the yellow is not enough. College Board has been very clear on this, so make sure you explain them. Okay, so my explanation was empires such as the Song dynasty rose in China but fell to the Mongols and resulted in the Yuan dynasty. I could stop there, but I remembered a couple more, so I'm going to go ahead and add them in. The Seljuk Turks conquered much of the Middle East, while the Kingdom of Mali rose in Africa. Okay, so I've got the first one. Oh, you know what? I forgot to explain the Black Plague. Dang it, I messed this one up. So I would need to add in something about how the Black Plague was traded along trade routes and, affected most of the world. Maybe a third of the population, third to a half of the population died. Something like that would go in right here. All right, so I was checking on y'all, making sure y'all are checking on me here. And then 1200 to 1450 was a time of vast trade. Not only were goods traded on the Silk, Indian Ocean, and Trans-Saharan roads, but also technology, religion, and other ideas. Now, one way I could kind of come back is if I wanted to put technology, religion, diseases, and other ideas. If I put religion and diseases such as the Black Plague, that would probably be a save in here. But what I really should do is add in a sentence explaining what the Black Plague was. All right, so you saw a way to do it right and incorrectly in the same example. Now, my last sentence here is really kind of a good transition. So remember, your prompt is, how much did trade, what was our prompt? Something about how much were the effects of trade economic? I think I got it now. So how much were the effects of trade economic? And so this is really kind of transitioning into that, right? That, not only were goods, that's economic, but these other things were traded too. And then I think you could transition into your thesis statement. But in upcoming videos, we'll put contextualization and thesis together. And once you have your thesis, that's when you need to see, do I need a transition sentence or not? And so I would just leave maybe a little bit of space on your paper so you can go back and make sure that it makes sense. Okay, so coming up next, we'll be annotating and summarizing documents, working towards that evidence points, and then, of course, the thesis statement, which is generally the most important part of your essay, right? That is your kind of roadmap. It's telling your reader what you're going to write about. So tune in next. Thank you.